Lesson 10.5, Surface Area of Prisms and Cylinders. Surface area of a solid is the sum of the areas of its faces. Again, just start where it says the sum of. A net is a two-dimensional representation of a solid. So it's like flattening out the solid. Lateral faces of a prism are the faces of the prism that are not bases. So they're not the bases. So I can find the lateral area of a prism by adding up or finding the sum of the areas of the lateral faces. Same thing with cylinder. It's the part that is not the base, so it's the curved surface of the cylinder. So if you think of a cylinder, it's actually just this part right here. It's not the top and the bottom of a cylinder. And obviously you can find the lateral area by adding up, or finding the area of the lateral surface. You will have a vocab test, so make sure part of your test, make sure you're putting this down. Example 1, this is a net. So we took a box and we flattened it out, and this is what resulted in it. If I fold this back up together, I would get some sort of rectangular prism. Use the net to find the surface area. Well, you can see that these rectangles are all the same measurement. 3 times 4, which is 12. And then we have these squares, which there's 2 of them. So you take the 12 and you multiply it by the 4 different rectangles, and you take the square and you multiply it by the 2 squares. So 4 times 12, or you add, same thing. 4 times 12 is 48, plus 9 times 2 is 18, and that's where you get 66 feet squared. That is the surface area of the storage chest. Remember, area is always squared. Here's a formula we could use as well. Now, this is a generic formula that I do not like to use. Instead, so kind of ignore all this. Instead, I'm going to give you 2 different formulas. One, if it's a rectangular prism, and one, if it's a triangular prism. So think of this as the base. This is the type of base it is. So here's the length times width times height. What you would do is you take 2 times the length times the width, plus 2 times the length times the height, plus 2 times the length, 2 times the width times the height. Triangular prism, you would take the base of the triangle and the height of the triangle. So that's basically the triangular base. Remember, a triangular prism looks similar to this. So it's the triangular base and the triangle's height. Multiply that together and then add the perimeter. That's what this capital P is. It's actually perimeter. So the perimeter of a triangle is just adding the 3 sides together. Okay, and if you need help with that, put down that this is the perimeter of a triangle times the height of the prism. So I put a real rectangle here because this is the height of the prism. So we're going to use these formulas instead of this generic formula. We're going to be more specific. Here is a triangle prism. Again, we're not going to use this, and I'm actually going to not use this at all. This is what we're using. So let's identify the parts. Here's the triangle. So here's the base of the triangle. Here's the height of the triangle. The 3 sides of the triangle, well, here's B. I can also say that 5 is A, and this side right here is the same as this side. So that means that C equals 13. That means 20 is the height of the prism. So I don't use this 2. I actually just take, and I don't use this half. So what happens is they cancel out. I take base, which is base and height together, so that's 5 times 12. Then I add my 3 sides, 5, 12, and 13, multiplied by 20. So multiply this together, add this together, times 20. And multiply 3 times 60, and 60 plus 60. Oh, sorry, this is 600. 600 plus 60 is 660. That is the surface area. The hardest part about this is knowing what the base of the triangle is, what the height of the triangle is. So identifying the parts. Here's a cylinder. Again, this is the generic formula. This formula is what we're really using. You only have 2 numbers, the radius and the height. So you plug in the radius, 4, and you plug in the height. Then just make sure that you do the square first. And we'll do an example of that here. So what is the radius? And you need the height. The radius is half of 3. So half of 3 is 1.5, and the height is 5. Plug in what you know. Square this first. Then multiply by 2, multiply by pi. Then multiply this whole thing, and then add it together. Adding should be last. And they kind of multiply by pi later. You should get 61.3 approximately. So the surface area of a can of soup is about 61.3 square inches. You might have a slightly different number just because anytime we talk about pi, we are rounding. For number 1 and number 2, I'm going to help you by giving you the formulas. Oops, length times height plus 2 times width times height. And this is 2 pi r squared plus 2 pi r h. Go ahead, fill in what you know. And actually, number 1, it doesn't matter what's the length, width, and height. It doesn't matter. Just put it down because you're all multiplying and adding. Please solve number 1 and number 2. The answer for number 1 is 346 meters squared. Number 2 is 503 feet squared. If you got this wrong, make sure you took 5 squared first and then multiply by pi and times 2. And also make sure you multiply this side first and then multiply that side first, and then the last thing you should do is add those 2 numbers together. That is the end of the lesson.